Now that I have got you all in a good mood,
Ooh.
our next speakers, and just so you know, I'm not going to join in the question and answer because tonight I want it to be all about what happened during the wheat board time that I talked about. So I have two gentlemen that were involved. They're part of the Dirty Dozen. And they are going to come up and tell about their experience with the wheat board. And I would like to invite Mr. Rick Strankman and Mr. Jim Ness to come up and tell their story. You can go stand beside each other.
Shane, they're both going to speak at the same time?
Well, they'll sit at the mic back and forth, yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to give them another mic?
Yeah, they have it. Just make sure that you speak on the microphone, please, okay? I'm just going to unplug. Okay, direct the microphones a little bit here. Just make sure to speak on the microphone and not like this, okay? I'll let you know because it's on the stream, so. One and two. I'm just going to connect on here.
I haven't told this to Rick, but he's responsible. He made the phone call that we're doing a convoy. He's responsible for getting me involved. So you talk first.
Well, that's one way of getting me up. Thanks, Jim. Or no thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, this whole action that we've been in, starting way back in 1995, a lot of kids or people in this room, and I see one young lady from McCady Valley. I don't know if she's that old or not, but part of the thing that we started in, or I initially shallowly started in, and I can relate to Tamara in that thinking that we're just going to go and do this, and in 5 or 10 years we'll be done with this and we'll be over. Not realizing the federal bureaucracy that we're fighting against, and I can still. There's many instances that we can relate to you. One in particular, after we had done the border convoy, there's two finely dressed of the Queen's Cowboys drove out from concert to deliver a summons, and I can still take you to the place in our yard where, and I'm not going to say his name, he's gone private now, the officer, he says, Strankman, you must have pissed off somebody way high up. For us to have to drive out here and serve you these summons, which normally would be sent to you by registered mail, means that somebody wants to intimidate you. And thick German bone structure up here, we just continued on. And so we matured in our arguments going forward that it wasn't just simply a regulation that we're trying to fight against. It was government control, federal government overreach. And a few days ago, or a week ago possibly, I was called by a CBC radio in Calgary for an interview, and she asked me, what do you think about this separatism thing? And I said, well, I've been going to some of the prosperity meetings in Provost, and normally there's 4 or maybe 6, 8 people, but I said the 1st of January this year there was 40. There was 2 carloads came from Wainwright to be involved with the Provost people. And I said, I live 30 miles from the nearest can of Coca-Cola. I don't go to the coffee shop. I don't do whatever. I'm not a hound like that. And then all of a sudden I get a phone call from a CBC out of Calgary wanting to know what I think. There's something going on here. And, you know, the whole movement of asserting yourselves. My son counseled me, and my phone died to read the text, but it's by Edmund Burke, and it says, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men, good people to do nothing. And and that's what I see. And I've always tried to relate, even through my elected life. I always try to relate to the people, and whether you be a truck driver, a welder, a deckhand, whatever. And that's why I like to really relate to Chris Scott, a young fellow that came from British Columbia to make his way on the oil fields in Alberta, and then got all wrapped up in this freedom thing, simply defending his own personal rights. And that's, to our grain thing, it was our grain. It was our property. It was, it wasn't, and this whole policy change wasn't necessarily about Rick Strankman or Jim Ness. It's about the people like yourselves and like the people that are sitting beside you. You have a right to your driver's license. You have a right to your gun license. You have a right to your land title. It's your property. And that's what we're endeavoring to bring forward, in our quest here as well. None of us are looking for any leadership roles, certainly not this old codger. But we can provide you with good information and assistance and hopefully direction to continue the fight. So I'll leave it up to my cellmate. I had the top bunk, Jim had the bottom bunk, and we got along famously there. Unfortunately, Shane, I have to correct you a little bit. We weren't in there for as long as you said, but it definitely was a life-changing experience.
Back in the 60s, somewhere in the mid-60s, I took one of the first loads of wheat into the New Brigden elevator, and there was a lineup. There was 10, I don't remember exactly how many, but it was probably 10 or 12 3-ton trucks. And so the old leg on the elevator was slow, so it took a long time to unload each truck and get it weighed and kicked out. So the truck in front of me was Dan Hertz, and Shane was a little gaffer at that time. He was along too. And I said, after listening to some of the older guys talk, complaining about the lineup at the elevator, I said, I just came from Sedalia this morning, and the doors are open on the elevator, and there's no trucks there at all. Why don't we just go over there? And Dan Hertz, he educated me real quick. And that was the beginning of my learning about the intrusion into our private business. Dan Hertz said, if we took our trucks over and dumped at Sedalia, it would be an offense, and the Canadian Wheat Board could charge us with serious charges. That's the kind of regulations that was on the producers back then. And that was when I started to do some research and see what we were trapped by. So interesting that 30 years later, when we do the convoy, who's there in the lineup but the Hertz boys? So salute to Dan Hertz and his family. They've always been freedom fighters. So back there, our trials went on for, I think, about 3 years. You know, it was just a ridiculous setup. I remember the first judge, his name was Fred Coward. And he did not like us. He hated us. So one day, when we were in the courthouse, one of the clerks, a farmer's daughter from the Lethbridge community, spilled the beans. And she said, did you know that Fred Coward's son robbed a casino at Knife Point just a few months ago? And he got off with community service. So that was just another experience that we had to see what we were up against. So after the trials were done, we knew there was going to be some time before the government made up their minds what they were going to do. So that rolls around to the year 2000, and Shirley McClellan appointed me to the Alberta Grain Commission. And so after a couple of meetings, the chairperson of the meeting said, Ness, you're going to the SIGI conference in Winnipeg that the Canadian Wheat Board is sponsoring. You're going on behalf of the Alberta government. And I said, you got to be kidding. So I got there, and there was 28 people there as like farmers and whatnot. And I remember the first meeting was 5 minutes old. And the spokesperson that was introducing us students to what was planned in the week, he started talking about the wonders of the Canadian Wheat Board, that it was a co-op. And I interrupted him right away. I said, why don't you have the guts to call it what it is? It's a collective. It's not a co-op, it's a collective. So that got me marked, and I tried to do as good a job as I could during the week. And towards the end of the week, some of the other students said, we hear talk, Ness, they want to send you home. They want to get you out of here. But they didn't. So, of course, in our activity with Kevin Avram, who was the brains behind the success that we had, he had published a book called Ending Secrecy at the Canadian Wheat Board. And he was running Frontier Center for Agriculture out of Regina. And he set up a tour for us in Ontario. There was 4 or 5 producers that went down there, and Kevin teamed me up with an older farmer from East End, Saskatchewan, and we went to, the 4 or 5 of us went to all the Southern Ontario editorial boards with this book, Ending Secrecy at the Canadian Wheat Board, and it was an outstanding success. Those editorial writers and some of their bosses, in fact, the Kingston Whig Standard, it was the owner of the paper, sat there across the table and asked us questions for nearly an hour. So that exercise was a strategic move in that we found new ways to poke our masters, or the government that thought they were our masters. So it was quite an experience for a farm boy to walk into editorial boards, and because of the information I had, for some reason or other, I was chosen to do a press conference at the Charles Lynch press room in the Parliament Hill. And I was up against Barry Wilson, the socialist that used to write for the Western Producer. And I just had an easy time. He'd ask a question, and I'd just read it out of the book. So that's kind of what happened up to about 2000. And then one day in 2002, the spring of 2002, I got a visit from a lady from Canada Customs with papers indicating, Jim, you either got to pay your fine or go to jail. We didn't tell her that going to jail was part of the plan. So anyway, one of the last court cases that we had, I just remembered this. It was in front of the Alberta Court of Appeal. And for some reason or other, there was only 3 of us in front of the judge. And the judge said, I've been told that Ness, you're the spokesperson for the 3 guys, for you and your 2 friends. And I was not expecting that. So then he started to ask me questions. And I was kind of cheesed off because I don't like judges. Anyway, he said, it comes down to this. At the end of the hearing, he said, Ness, what are you boys going to do? Are you going to pay your fines or are you going to jail? So I stood up and I said, Judge, I have this thing. I just determined I wasn't going to call him Your Honor. I said, Judge, here's how it is. It's June. We're still seeding. We have a grasshopper outbreak. We're spraying for weeds and grasshoppers. But you know, Judge, we haven't been able to find a pesticide for the Canadian Wheat Board. And I was expecting.
I forgot that.
I
forgot that comment. That's true.
I was expecting to be hit with contempt of court, but I didn't care. I just didn't care. So the judge actually laughed when I said that. And so that court ended and we went on our way. But in the spring of 2002, I got those papers and I didn't say anything to the lady. She got out of her car. She wasn't driving. She had a driver. And she went to pass me the papers and her hands were just shaking like that. And I figured, my goodness, what are you afraid of, lady? So anyway, come October of 2002, our friend Kevin Avram, who was the brains behind the outfit, he had been the last editor of the Alberta Report magazine. If some of you still have a copy of some of those papers, he was the last editor in the last year. He said, Jim, your court day is set. I forget what date it was, the last week of October. And he said, we got to make a big deal of this.
October 3rd. It was Halloween night.
That's right.
Of 2002.
Yeah.
Or Halloween day, actually.
Yeah. So anyway, he said, we'll invite some speakers. And I had already had some friends said, we got music. We've created some songs about farmers going to jail. So it was going to be a big deal in a lot right across from the courthouse. So I told Kevin, I said, we got a week. I'm going to get the premier there. And he laughed at me. He said, you'll never get the premier there. But I called Shirley McClellan one Saturday morning. And I said, Shirley, here's what we're doing. We're going to have a big media event. The cameras will be there. And there's going to be music. We need you and the premier to come and speak. And she said, Jim, we support you privately, but we couldn't do something like that publicly. So I told her, I said, this event is going to create a whole bunch of emotion and political inertia that if you're not there to harness it, it's going to bite you in the ass. And so that was 9 o'clock in the morning. She called me 9 o'clock at night, and she said, I had dinner with the premier. We're going to be there.
That was Ralph Klein leading a parade, ladies and gentlemen.
So I'll just give you a quick little thing about what happened. After Klein spoke, Ted Morton spoke, and I was one of the tail end speakers. I don't remember who else spoke. And then it was time for us to surrender. We had agreed that after a few songs had played and a few speakers had spoke, we're going to walk across the street. And there was 800 or 900 people. Maybe some of you were there, I don't know. But I was the first. I just felt like I better be the first one to surrender. So I started walking, and standing in the middle of the street was Jim Fisher, the ag reporter. for the Drumheller station. And he stood right in the middle of the road. The crowd parted, and we had a space probably as wide as this room to walk through. And people were hollering, some were swearing, and actually I walked up to big Jim Fisher, and he stuck out his hand, tears running down his face. He was just crying something terrible. And I shook his hand and walked on and walked in and signed the paper. And should I say it?
I'll say it.
No.
Because Jim was one of the first ones to surrender, and our big friend Kevin Avram was standing there. He couldn't believe what was going on as well. And Jim's got handcuffs on him, and once you surrender, then you got to go, and the guard will take you in. Jim's famous parting words were, "Kretchen, the scumbag."
So what brought that up is I was handcuffed with my hands behind the back, and Art Hanger was there, a Reform MP, and he started to holler, "That's illegal, you can't do that." The big guard, he cuffed me and then gave me a push, and I had to pedal my feet real quick or I would have been on my nose in the concrete. So I was a little cheesed off. So a woman reporter from the Calgary Herald was running beside me, and she said, "Tell me what you're thinking, tell me what you're thinking." And that's what I said, "John Chrétien's a scumbag." So I had to phone some friends in Ottawa the next day to apologize, and they said, "No, don't apologize. You just said what everybody in Western Canada believes anyhow."
If I could just interject to that too, ladies and gentlemen, one of our cellmates is now a counselor in the MDF Tabor, John Turcato, and hope he doesn't mind me nailing him for this, because John too surrendered that day, and to Shane's comment earlier about some of us stayed in overnight, some of us stayed in whatever. Like it personally, we had 700 acres of crop still out in the field, so I kind of wanted to get home. So it turned into let's make a deal. It's part of the judicial system, whatever you want to call that. But and I didn't know John was one of the later guys to turn themselves in. And at Jim Chatney's recent funeral, you probably remember this, John brought up that the ladies in the back, the ladies that do the clerk of the court, and they administer the paper, the law, they were all crying. They couldn't believe.
Yeah, when I went to the next Alberta Grain Commission meeting, Doug Horner, who was already the ag minister, he was having a meeting in one of the towns there around Morinville. He said he announced what had happened to the crowd. He said the auditorium was full, and he said he asked for a minute of silence for the farmers that were locked up. And he said during that minute of silence, there was people crying and swearing. So it was a kind of an emotional time because we had to take a risk. We knew how the government regulation was worded, and of course they changed it right after we were put in jail. The way it was written, you either pay your fine or you go to jail. So shortly, the change that they made was pay your fine or we'll take your money another way. So going to jail really embarrassed the government. And we had phone calls right from Newfoundland to Vancouver Island, people offering to pay for our fines. I don't know how much money came in, but that was kind of small.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's back to what I said earlier. I know Jim has more to say, but really, again, you couldn't pick those 13 guys out of the crowd. You think of the person sitting beside you here tonight. I mean, that's the kind of people we are. We don't try and present as anything special or whatever. We've just done different shit. You know, like that's all. And so now it's time for you as well, in a different venue, completely different venue, to step forward in your own ways.
And it's all about taking a risk. Like we were scared that Revenue Canada would come over and take our farm. That's some of the fear that we had. So you want to fight for freedom? It's here now, and we're going to have to take some risks that you people have never done before. So I've been a separatist since grade 10. Only I wanted to separate back then because, Quebec was getting favoritism and we were being, taken advantage of out here. So I've forgiven the French. But it comes down to there's a big load ahead of us. There's people that don't understand the consequences of not going independent. Yes. They don't realize that Carney's friends in the London banking district and in Davos, they can hardly wait to get locking us down and imposing digital ID. So when digital ID comes, it's going to come and it'll come soon. And if we lose the referendum, if we get waxed, I'm expecting Carney's friends to be aggressive in getting their program. And I did some reading about digital ID. And what they're saying is if you register for digital ID, there's other things you have to do to keep it current. And to keep your digital ID current is you have to take a jab every 3 months. You have to have a cell phone and the what do you call it? The QR code will be carried on your phone. So when you go to a business, you have to flash the code to see that your digital ID is right up. So please don't do that. Don't take it. So like we could talk for hours if you wanted to, but I'm more interested in hearing Tamara. But it comes down to this: we learned some things. Like the three, let's just talk for a couple of minutes on the 3 levers of power.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, an American author, John Kenneth Galbraith, is a prominent lefty, actually. Wrote a book called Levers of Power. And there's 3 ways that you can gain power, but there's also 3 ways that you can express power. Do you remember them, Jim?
Yeah. The 3 levers of power is the ability to reward, the ability to penalize, and the third one is propaganda. So this is what we were up against in the fight. And our advisor, Kevin Avram, said, if you can just fix one or put up with one, you can actually win the day. And that was the driving force for going to jail.
Along those lines, ladies and gentlemen, Jim had mentioned earlier that Kevin was, and actually I guess it's called the Prairie Center, not the He was also involved in the Frontier Center, but the Prairie Center, a think tank organization out of Regina. But and Kevin would write weekly columns there. But the idea of his booklet called Ending the Secrecy at the Canadian Wheat Board was very powerful. The Canadian Wheat Board was not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. Neither was CSIS, neither are cabinet documents, and I think there's one other entity that I'm not aware of or can't remember just now. But one thing that did come out of those inquiries that Kevin made of the Canadian Wheat Board was that in the basement of the building on 500 Main or whatever it is in Winnipeg was that all these farmers who thought that they were getting every last dollar that they for their wheat, they were paying for a daycare center down there and several daycare supervisors for the people upstairs, where no other private business or anything government business even did that. So these farmers had to pay for a daycare center. Even those who were full endorsers of the Wheat Board's ideology and their marketing strategy just lost their stuff over that. They couldn't believe that their money was being used in that fashion that they never knew about. It wasn't necessarily the amount of money, it was the principle of the way it was being abused.
So back in the 90s, there was 600 people involved in selling Western Canada wheat. And in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Cargill had 13 people selling about the same volume of wheat. So that's why our price is always lower than the American price, because we had all these bureaucrats to look after.
Well, and part of the whole entity was that we had no control of what they would actually sell it for. They felt that we were too ignorant to even know what the market should be or how we could garner it. In fairness, in some defense to them, we didn't have the devices that we do now, where you can get a market price in your pocket. But there are other, entities and even people now market their grain through a grain broker, and the broker actually sources out the home for their grain for their product. So there are other ways to achieve arbitrage. It's called a fair market for your price. And one of the things that I used to like to quote, and I see a couple folks here from near Veteran, and I was going to the Veteran auction mark. Unfortunately, now deceased Terry Schutzel, and we'd say, we'd always try and sell our cattle for the least amount. They go into the auction market and guys bid for your cattle, and they actually bid the price up. They don't bid it down; they bid the price up. And so the same thing can happen for your other property, your grain, the stuff that you grew. And so, it's that principle in our case, really.
So I'd like to just read two quick quotes, please. Before Alberta was a province in 1904, Canada's Minister of the Interior, one Clifford Sifton, said this: "We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way our prosperity." So that's one of the Liberal government ministers that was responsible for pushing Alberta and Saskatchewan into provincehood, because nobody had a vote on it. It was imposed on us. The other, in closing, I just want to read this. Anybody here remember the name William Aberhart? Okay, in 1935, William Aberhart, he traveled all of Alberta, even came to places like Youngstown, Serial, Oyen, Concert.
Part of the Depression.
Yeah, right in the 1935, in the middle of the Depression, and he was running to be the next premier of Alberta. This is what he said, trying to motivate people to action. He said, "If the people of Alberta haven't suffered enough, it's their God-given right to suffer some more."
Just wow.
Thank you, I'm done.
We'll take your questions or comments, whatever.
We're going to just
Oh,
after
yes.
the Q&A.